Hello. I did this video yesterday on the subject of gravity, and predictably, the comments that have come in have been beyond vile. Anything at all that they think they can get at me about, they will. It's comments about the way I speak, about me being stupid, about me not knowing what I'm talking about, being indoctrinated, just repeating things that I've read in books. Nothing actually addressing what I said in the video. Really. Or nothing worth reading about it anyway. Now, all I said in this video is basically anything that you would intuitively understand as constituting exerting a force can be reproduced with the weight of an object. And the weight of an object is determined by its mass and is not related to its density. And that is exactly what gravity is. Gravity is a force that pulls all objects down towards the earth, and the magnitude of the force is going to be proportional to the mass of the object. Now, I don't understand then, how do you go from giving lots of examples of why there's good reasons to believe there is a force acting on things, and the evidence that supports that this force is determined by the mass of the object, and then say that there's no gravity, and claim that it can all be explained by density and buoyancy, when density and buoyancy are caused by pressure gradients in fluids, because the fluid has weight, because there's a force pulling it down. It's demented. And it really supports my view that flat Earth is a kind of mind virus that has evolved online, and people choose to be infected by it. And once you're infected by it, you cannot assess information. You do not seem capable of looking at information or looking at the world and thinking about it properly. Everything is distorted in the minds of flat earthers. They cannot process information or ideas. And all they do is tell you that you've got to have an open mind and you've got to be more receptive to this idea. Why should you be receptive or open-minded to something that is clearly nonsensical? And I just wanted to talk a little bit about the history of this, because if you go to the Flat Earth Society website and you go to a forum here called Flat Earth Q&A, you can see that this goes way, way back. This goes back to 2005. And you can read year after year of this being discussed online. And this kind of mind virus evolving and learning its defense mechanisms against reality. So you can read people explaining to flat earthers why the earth is a sphere, and flat earthers evolving all the defense mechanisms against it. And this went on for years without most people even being aware of it. It was tiny, just a crazy corner of the internet. And from what I understand, it seems that for some reason in about 2012, it started to expand. Maybe it's because there was a lot of conspiracy theories associated with 2012. But I think the reason that it got going is twofold. I think partly it came in the wake of 9/11, and there was a huge amount of paranoia about that. And also, you combine that with this relatively new invention at the time, the internet. It was quite new at the time. It was only about 10 years old in 2005. And people had only really been using forums like this for really not that long. So you had this new thing, this new way that people could come together and share fantasies and delusions, combined with this intense paranoia caused by 9/11. And I think you can see that these two things came together and created Flat Earth. And like I said, in 2012, it seemed to start gaining some traction. And then, as we all know, and if anyone that's been following this will know, in 2015, it just seemed to explode for some reason. And ever since then, it's gone through waves of new people coming into it. And again, at the moment, it seems to be growing at an alarming rate. I just checked Eric Dubay's channel, and he's got not far off 100,000 subscribers. I think the last time I looked a few months ago, he was only about maybe 60,000, so that's alarming. And the thought that there are 100,000 people out there who think that Eric Dubay is worth listening to is disturbing in the extreme. Now, what I wanted to do in this video was talk about the issue of curvature. And flat earthers are always saying, where's the curvature? Where's the curvature? Oh, you see things going over the horizon, but you don't see curvature from left to right. What, are we living on a cylinder? You know, and Del from Imaginary Curve says that to the people in the street interviews. I'm using Del as a focal point really for discussing this. It's just because he's out on the streets. It's worth using him as an example. So in this video, I'm going to talk about curvature, and I'm going to talk about the concept called locally straight or locally flat. Now you can see on the software here, I have a circle drawn here, and it has a radius of 3,960 units. So that's a model of the Earth using 1 unit for 1 mile roughly. Now a circle, as I've said before, it's a cross section of a sphere, so we can use this to talk about how much curvature you would see on the Earth. If you're talking about a curved line, we'd say that it's locally straight. If you're talking about a curved surface, we'd say it's locally flat. So let's look at a part of this circle and compare it to a perfectly straight line like you can see here. Let's see if I can just move the line without moving everything else. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so let's just have a look at a little bit of this. I'll get rid of that line there. I don't think I need that just now. All right, so you can see that's part of that's a straight line. That's part of a circle. Okay. Now let's move the line up so we're seeing less of the circle. That's too big yet. Let's zoom out a little bit again. Now you can see that when I show you a smaller part of the circle, it deviates less from a perfectly straight line. It gets closer to being a straight line. That's what we call locally straight. It's a very simple, well understood mathematical idea that when you look at something, a small part of a curve, then it will approximate to being straight. Now let's see if we can get... So this line's now just cutting the circle and no more. So you're just getting a tiny, tiny bit of it. Let's see if we can... Yeah, so you can see there, it's practically a a tangent, but when you zoom in, you can see that it's actually just cutting through the circle. So let's sort of adjust it so that's all we can see, the straight line and the little bit of the circle that we call. Now, a little bit of a circle is called an arc. So this is an arc, and this is a straight line. So again, you can see, taking an even smaller bit of the circle, it gets even closer to just being a straight line. And that continues and continues as you get smaller and smaller and smaller. It approximates more and more and more to a straight line. That's what we call locally straight. Now, you can easily extend this argument to a curved surface, because you can, if you drew a circle on the surface of a sphere and then drew a great circle right round the sphere so that part of that great circle was the diameter of that circle, then you can imagine this curved line as being part of the diameter of a circle on the surface of a sphere. So you can imagine this is kind of like looking at a circle from the side, and this is how curved it would be. I hope I explained that clearly. I don't know if I did, but okay, so that's locally straight and locally flat. You take a smaller and smaller part of a curved line, it approximates closer and closer to a straight line. If you take a smaller and smaller part of a curved surface, it approximates more and more to a flat surface. So if you cut out a circle from a sphere and you cut out a really small circle, it will be approximately flat. There's nothing strange or mysterious about that, okay? Okay, so let's look at some specific examples of this. So let's start with 100 miles. So again, you can see I've got a circle drawn, radius 3,960 miles. And I'm going to zoom in. And you can see that I've got a straight line joining 2 points on the circle. So you can imagine, say you took a sphere with a radius of 3,960 miles and you marked off 2 points on its surface and drew a line between them. Then you can imagine that that line there, the curved line, is the line following the curvature of the sphere. And this is a perfectly straight line going between them. Now, let's consider some numbers, because I know flat earthers will see this. They'll say, oh, you're just showing this on a piece of software. But if I analysed it mathematically, they'll say, no, you're just doing mathematics. But if I show it on the software, it's just a piece of software. So we'll talk about both the numbers and I'm showing you it visually. So first of all, what's the difference in length between the curved line and the perfectly straight line? Well, if the curved line was exactly 100 miles long, the straight line would be a little bit shorter. It would be about 14 feet shorter. So we're not talking a huge amount. Now, how much do they deviate in the centre? Well, they deviate by about 1,667 feet. Now, you may well think that's a lot, but considering that that's over 100 miles, which is over 500,000 feet, it's not really that much. Now, to put it in perspective, I've made these kind of comparisons before. Imagine this is a metre long, so this is 100 centimetres, and that this curved line deviates very slightly from this perfectly straight line. Then in the middle, it would be deviating by 3 millimetres. So this is the same as, this curved line is the same as a line a metre long, bending so that the middle of it deviates by 3 millimetres from a perfectly straight line. Okay, there's hardly any curvature at all. So that there is how curved a line 100 miles long on the Earth would look. And there's your perfectly straight line. And there's your curved line. Now, Dell says things like, oh, you can see 100 miles from left to right. You'd have to be really, really high up to be able to see 100 miles from left to right. I haven't done the calculations. We're talking like well over 1,000 feet anyway, a couple of thousand feet to be able to really have a look. And you'd have to be looking over the sea. And even then, this is how much curvature you would see over 100 miles. Now, there is no contradiction in saying that the curvature is too slight to be seen and it can obscure things. If you were, say, at the left-hand side here at this point here, and you were 1,667 feet above the surface and you were looking across here, then half of this curved line would be obscured from your view by the curvature. Okay, so now if you were here, you would be looking down very, very slightly onto the horizon, which would be about halfway along here. Now, the angle of depression of the horizon at that height, looking along there, would be 0.7 degrees. So the horizon would be just below eye level. Now, to put it in perspective, the diameter of a full moon is about 0.5 degrees, so slightly more than the diameter of a full moon. So if that's if you were 1,667 feet above sea level. And if you could see 100 miles of the Earth, that's how curved it would look. And that's 100 miles. Let's go down a bit to another stage. Let's go down and see 50 miles. Still quite a lot of distance. There's a perfectly straight line. There's a curved line, 50 miles long. So what are the figures to do with this? Well, if the curved line was exactly 50 miles long, the perfectly straight line would be about 21 inches shorter. In the middle, the line 50 miles long would deviate from the straight line by about 417 feet. Now again, to put that in perspective, if this was a metre long, the curved line would deviate from the straight line by about 1.7 millimetres. And again, if you were at this left-hand side and your eyes were 417 feet above sea level and you were looking at across here, half the curved line would be obscured by the horizon, which would be about halfway between this point and this point for you. And you would be looking down very slightly towards it. The angle of depression would be 0.4 degrees. So that would be just slightly less than the diameter of a full moon. So again, it would look very much at eye level. And you wouldn't be seeing left to right 100 miles or 50 miles. And even if you were 50 miles, this is how curved a line 50 miles on the face of the Earth looks. Okay, you can see that's a circle. I can zoom in. That's how curved it is. You can see that's a perfectly straight line. And I've given you the figures as well, so you can't see what's just software. Okay, I've given you both the numbers and I've given you a visual demonstration. The amount of curvature that is there is absolutely tiny. And to say that it's not a contradiction to say that it's enough to obscure things. Okay, this is a point flat earthers really want to bamboozle people with. It's a totally dishonest approach. The problem is, it is very hard to visualize the geometry of the surface of the Earth because we're so tiny on it. And we're only seeing a tiny amount. And the curvature on the scale that we can see it is tiny. So it's very hard to visualize. It's very hard to visualize someone at this end, only about 400 feet above, looking along and trying to imagine their line of sight connecting with the horizon, which will be about halfway along, and trying to visualize how much that angle would bend down would be an angle to the perfect horizontal for a person at that location. It's really hard to visualize it. It's impossible to show it properly visually. Now, when I have used diagrams, I've usually used them that are out of proportion. So you can see the person looking down towards the horizon. And the amount of times flat earthers have said, you've shown them looking down towards the horizon. Yeah, because I've had to, just to demonstrate the numbers in the diagram. The diagram is just there to demonstrate what's going on. It's not an accurate visual representation of the situation, and I've made that clear every time I've done that, and yet every time I still get these comments. Oh, you've shown someone looking down on the horizon. Okay, the angle of depression for someone 417 feet above sea level of the horizon would be 0.4 degrees. It would just be very slightly below eye level. Let's go even smaller. Again, here I'll zoom out. You can see this is a circle. Now, here, I'm just looking at 6 miles. The curvature is so small, you can't even see the difference between... Right, that's your straight line. And that's your curved line. Straight line, curved line. Now, I'll put it over so you're seeing exactly 6 miles, or as close as possible, of both of them. Right, so there you go. So that's how curved the line... Oops. Got it now. That's how curved a line 6 miles long on the Earth would look. Again, if you were at this end and your eyes were 6 feet above and you were looking along, the horizon would be halfway along and the curvature would obscure half of the curve. Now, the angle at which you would be looking down towards the horizon would be 0.04 degrees. And looking from left to right, you would only really be seeing about, I don't know, up to maybe 10 miles at most from left to right. So why would you see curvature from left to right? And flat earthers have often said to me, oh, why don't you show someone looking at the horizon and show that it's at eye level, show the diagram? Why do you always show them looking down? Well, you show me how to do it then. You show me in this diagram. The distance from here to the halfway along would be 3 miles, right? That's about 16,000 feet. And the person is 6 feet tall, and their line of sight would be from there to there. You show me how I show that on a diagram. It's impossible to represent the geometry of this on a diagram. The angles and the scales are just impossible to represent, and it's really hard to visualize it. But you can demonstrate it mathematically. There is no problem with saying that something is obscured by the horizon, but you don't see curvature from left to right. There is no problem with that at all. None. And what do we see when we look out to sea, if we're sailing away from a city or from land? Anywhere on Earth, you can see something like this. Now, this is a little thing that someone put together of Toronto, and they've superimposed a scaled picture of the CN Tower to show you how much is missing from this diagram. Now, this is exactly what you would expect to see on a spherical Earth. Okay, you would not expect to see any curvature from left to right. I mean, across from left to right, you're only seeing maybe a mile or so. And the amount of curvature between here and Toronto is tiny. It's very misleading because you're looking straight towards it, right through the curvature. But the curvature will be tiny. It's about 30 miles away, with a very, very small amount of curvature over that 30 miles. You know, and I mean, to remind you, there's 50 miles. So it's kind of like being at one end of this line and looking across it, and there's some skyscrapers at the other end, and they're partially obscured by this curvature, this very tiny amount of curvature. But when you look at it when you're looking along it, you see the skyscrapers and you see what seems like a massive hump, but it's not, it's an illusion. And you look at it from side to side, there's no way you would see curvature. This whole thing is it's just beyond dishonest. It's so dishonest, this approach that they take. Can we just get this absolutely sorted out once and for all? Whether you believe the Earth is flat or straight, you would not see curvature on a sphere with a radius of 3,960 miles at the scale of a human being. You wouldn't see it. Now, the exact height you would have to be before it became absolutely obvious is slightly ambiguous. Now also, not finish that point. I would say at 20 miles above the Earth, it would be unmistakably obvious that it was a sphere, or at least that it was curved. At the height of an airplane, about 7 miles, it's not obvious whether you would see it or not. There's a lot of factors to take into account. It's not clear. Now, it's unfortunate, or maybe fortunate, for flat earthers that commercial flights don't fly much higher than about 7 or 8 miles. If commercial flights regularly flew about 15 miles, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. Everyone in the world would have seen the curvature with their own eyes that's been in an airplane. Now, one last thing Dell always goes on about is like, oh, all right, so there's no curvature like on a bath, and there's no curvature on a lake that you can see. It's not visible, but supposedly at some point it starts to curve. Well, when you're dealing with something like this, there'll be a certain scale at which the curvature is so completely negligible that you might as well just call it flat or straight. There'll be a scale at which the curvature is absolutely noticeable, and there'll be a gap in between where it's a bit fuzzy whether you would regard it as as negligible or significant. That's just life. Like, the world's full of what you call fuzzy boundaries. That doesn't prove anything. Highlighting the fact that there's a fuzzy boundary between the scale at which you would consider it to be flat and the scale at which you would consider it to be curved doesn't mean anything. I mean, you answer me this then. If you think you should be able to state the exact length at which you would expect to say, yeah, there's definitely curvature. If you took a photograph of yourself every day, how long would it be before you could say you definitely noticed aging? How many days? Could you specify the exact number of days? I mean, if you took a photograph of yourself every day for a month, you would not see any significant aging. If you did it for 10 years, you would. Well, where's the bit in between? Where's the exact cutoff? You see, that's the standard of argument that Dell's putting forward there. That's the logic. He's expecting you to be able to give an exact boundary when you can't. It doesn't mean anything to point out a fuzzy boundary. The world's full of them. Anyway, probably been talking too long, so I'll cut it off there. And yeah. Bye for now.